Hello and welcome to another episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey. And today I'll be talking to Lily Brunton. Some of you may know her from her marvelous Facebook posts, where she posts regularly on spiritual issues and observations. I know her because I met her through Rory Duff, and she's worked with Rory Duff. And I wanted to talk to Lily about the quest for the Grail, which comes from Rory Duff's book, Grail Found. Now, I've been trying to get Lily on the show for quite some time, and I was finally successful. And it looks like we might have to do a follow-up because there certainly wasn't enough time to cover all of the topic. In fact, the episode runs a little long, but I would recommend that you stick with it until the end. Every single minute, I think, is worth listening to. I hope that you agree. And if you do, please subscribe, like, and share. It helps me a lot. Thank you.
Well, when I was a little girl, my grandfather was called Arthur, which is a very redolent name in terms of the Grail stories.
Yeah,
And he used to tell me all about the knights of the Round Table and
right.
King Arthur's court, and that they were searching for something divine, and that they were held together in the spirit of brotherhood, and obviously that extends to sisterhood, and that they had ideals that this modern world really needs right now.
Mm-hmm.
They had communion, fellowship, codes of morals that seem to be sadly lacking now. And I learned these tales at my grandfather's knee from probably a very small child, and they stayed with me. The Arthurian cycle, whether it's real or not, is almost immaterial because obviously we have different narratives being overlapped through time, and it's very difficult to pull to pieces the actual truth of the tale. But we do have a number of great commentators who, down the years, have written poems and stories. And so I think today, if we might, Gary, and with your permission and that of all your followers and viewers, I think it might be a good idea to just look into the different versions of the Grail that we've had and what that might give us in terms of information and clues and possible codes that we might follow if we as Grail Knights, and I include women in that, are following the Grail Trail.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me just throw in that for me, the Arthur myths and legends were always my go-to stories growing up as well. So I had books. My father bought me a collection of stories. I also have read quite a few of the myths and stories that kind of fed into that. So obviously, as part of my spiritual growth with people like the Servants of the Light, I read many of those texts and returned to them over and over and over again. And to me, exactly, it doesn't matter whether Arthur was real or not. There's something in those stories that is eternally um, encouraging and attractive, I guess, and
Mm.
interesting. And I think that in no small way did those stories put me on my path as well, because I've always been seeking the mystery of life, death, and everything.
I think a lot of us can really identify with that because we know that this material world has its limits and that it is on the exterior. Sure, it has value, it's interesting. The natural world in particular is endlessly fascinating and beautiful. But in our hearts and souls, we know that there is something deeper. There is something mysterious that we have to dig for at the coalface of our own inner selves.
Mhm.
And that means healing trauma. It means looking at why we are who we are. And also, I think, looking at how we fit in with the collective gestalt of humanity and whether we are actually rising as individuals into a new time of group consciousness and what that means for us. And I think the Grail ties in with this because the Grail is a spiritual seeker's journey. And it's almost like the hero's journey, as delineated by the dear old Joseph Campbell.
Mm.
And that hero's journey is very much shown within, for example, films.
Yeah.
You have Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where they find the Grail in the beautiful setting of Petra in Jordan, and obviously the Grail heals his father. And it brings us, I think, perhaps to the enduring myths as to what the Grail is. And again, we're kind of caught between this dichotomy of the exterior world and the interior world, because is the Grail actually a thing? Is it an object? Is it a spear? Is it a cup? Is it a chalice? Is it a dish, a bowl, a cauldron, a sword? Is it a platter? What actually is the physical Grail? And for me, in my journeys, I think I've come to see it more as an invisible thing, something that is beyond our touch, our senses, the five senses of taste, touch, smell, sight, and another one, feeling, I suppose. It is beyond all of those senses, and therefore it is only tangible on the interior. And that makes me very excited. But again, those symbols, those ideas of what the Grail physically is another clue that we'll follow as we progress down following our own Grail trail. But if I might, I'd really like to start with reading everyone, and yourself as well, a fairy tale. With your permission, I would like to read King Lauren's Rose Garden,
Yeah.
because this has a really strong bearing on so many things associated with the Grail. And I'm taking this particular version from Rory Duff's excellent book, Grail Found. So, are we sitting comfortably?
Yes.
Then I will begin. Deep in the mountains of the Italian Tyrol, it is said that King Lauren of the Dwarves lived in paradise, in an enchanted garden filled with beautiful roses. I have some with me here today. It is said, too, that all that a person needs to unlock the gates to this wonderland is a skeleton key and to partake in the rose magic. The key is said to be the knowledge that love is the spirit. And the key is to have the spirit within you. If you can do this, you can then unlock the door to this paradise by partaking in this rose magic. As the legend goes, a young bride had gone missing in the forest, and the king of the Goths, a man called Dietrich von Bern, set out with his knights to look for her. I'm just going to interject. The word Dietrich means key in German. Once in the mountains, one of them began to follow the ancient Tyrolean Treu de Roses, a rose path. This was the path that was said to lead to King Lauren's realm. Whilst on this path, the knight came across a group of 3 rose bushes. He picked a rose from the first bush, and an elf appeared and spoke to him from inside the bush. And it said, "Bring me a rose from the old times." The knight replied, "I would do so gladly, but how can I find it?" He received no reply, so he picked another rose from the second bush, and this time the elf jumped out and asked him the same question, and the knight replied exactly the same as before, and the elf then disappeared. The knight picked a third rose from the third bush, and this time the elf jumped out in front of him, and he asked, "Why do you knock so loudly upon our door?" The knight replied, "I want to enter the rose garden because I am looking for a bride." The elf said, "Only a child or a singer can enter the rose garden. If you can recite a beautiful song, then the way is open to you." The knight replied, "Well, gosh, that's something I can do." At that, the elf bid him to follow, and they walked down into a ravine where there was an old flour mill. Inside it, there were several dwarves who were sleeping. The elf woke them by saying, "Wake up, sleepyheads, the roses are in bloom." At that, the dwarfs got up and started to grind the grains into flour. The elf then led the knight further down a small passage and into the brightest of light. After seeing through the light, the knight saw the paradise garden, full of roses, open up before him. Looking more closely, he also saw a silken thread which spanned everything. The knight then knew that he could see eternity, but could not yet enter to see if the bride was within. The elf turned to him, and he said, "Now it is time for you to sing your song." Now all the young men in that region knew the song of love. So the knight began to sing, and I'm not going to force my singing voice up upon you all, but I will read what the song said. Love is neither man or wife. It has no soul or body. Your essence remains to be invented. It cannot be compared. And yet you can never reach God's grace without it. Into false hearts she never goes. It only belongs to noble ones. And I'm sure they all lived happily ever after. That fairy tale was written 1500 years ago and was no doubt part of oral tradition for a much longer time. And that's kind of where Rory starts the Grail journey in Grail Found. And for me, this is a very, very important Dietrich key to the kingdom and the queendom of the Rose Garden.
Okay.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, of course. I'm just I'm in the process of reading Rory's book, so I had not recalled all the details, but yeah.
I think we need to do a potted history of how the Grail has come to us. And that is as good a starting point as any, which Rory has also started with.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason that it's so important is the key themes within it.
Yeah.
Of talking to the elementals, the elves within the rose flowers, of following the line, the thread that
Yeah.
weaves everything together, of asking the right questions and singing or saying the right words to open the key.
Well, interestingly enough, when I read that story in the book, which was only about 2 weeks ago because it only just arrived, the thing that struck me was that we think that the church in Yindikru Radets with the Templar artwork refers to some frequencies.
Mm.
And we think we've got two of them. They're solfeggio frequencies, so they're likely to all be solfeggio frequencies. And perhaps this relates to the song bit, because when you play those frequencies in that node, it's like you just amped up the power 100 times.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I can relate to that fully 100%.
Yeah.
I have known of the Rudston out in East Yorkshire for 35, probably 40 years. And I've been visiting it for all of that time.
And yeah, I've
And
never seen you there.
and yet we've not met there, have we?
I haven't been going regularly since I
Well, we
left
need to
the
follow the
UK,
Grail
but
Trail and the roses to get to align the timing, because timing is another very important factor
yeah.
in anything to do with the Grail, but we'll get on to that.
Did I ever tell you? I don't think so, but my father, when I was a boy, my father was he was just a self-educated guy, and he worked as a sort of service engineer on electrical stuff. And so he had meters and things. And he used to
Mm.
go to Rudston and he'd send his meter up the stone and he saw that there's spirals of energy going up the
Yeah.
stone that he could measure with his meter.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he took me there many, many times when I was a lad. And of course,
Mm.
whenever I come home and I have the opportunity, I do go out there.
Yeah.
And last time I took my dowsing rods, I found the lines there.
Yes, there are four
Yeah,
type 4 lines that
exactly.
literally node at the Rudston.
Yeah.
And part of the funny part of that was when I was first introduced to Rory's work, I visited it, and the first thing that I had as an individual was a sense of bees buzzing, and I was there in the winter. And I could
Huh.
hear this incredible, very low buzzing sound. And I literally kept looking for the bees in my total ignorance because I couldn't believe that the sound was so strong,
Yeah.
and yet the people I'd gone with couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, I
Can
went
I, can
into
I, sorry, we may have to do 3 or 4 of these to get to the end. What I've found and ever with me is that some of these nodes we can hear bees buzzing
yeah,
and we look for the bees. Sometimes there are bees, but quite often it's like, winter, middle of winter, there's no
yeah,
bees.
and there aren't any
But
bees,
we
no.
can hear the bees. But even more interestingly, sometimes when two type fours come very close together but don't cross, very close, within like a meter or so,
Hmm.
you can hear a high pitched sound as well, like
Yeah.
an interference sound. And the funny thing is I was out at a place called Vishkov back end of last year, and I was dowsing, and an old gentleman, Czech guy, came by. He says, "What are you doing?" He could speak English, which helped a lot because my Czech is awful. So we started talking, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Oh." He said, "Well, if you go a bit further up the path to the first street on the left and then go right to the lamppost," he says, "there's a very strange sound, high-pitched frequency sound there, and I don't think it's caused by anything electrical.
Hmm.
Could we go and have a look?" And
Oh,
sure enough, basically two Type 4s came so close they almost crossed and then bent away from each other. And in that location, even this man could hear it. It was
hmm.
so obvious. So
Doesn't surprise me.
these sound lines do I think interfere with each other,
Mm.
and that creates this background sound. When they cross, it seems to be more like a bee type buzzing
Yes.
sound and that sort of frequency. When
Yeah.
they come close together, it's a higher pitched, more discordant sound, actually.
Right. Well, just to finish the story of the
Sorry.
Rudston, it's okay. I went into the church and I was struck above the altar how on the ceiling there were hundreds of circular artworks with 8-pointed stars within them.
Mm, mm-hmm,
And I got home and I messaged Rory
mm-hmm.
and I said, I've taken a picture of this church, and I sent it to him. And that was when he first dowsed remotely the Rudston and said, yeah, you've got a type 4 node there. And the Templar church was telling you that with its symbology on the ceilings of the church.
Yeah.
And so that was a lovely little synchronicity and clue, I suppose, as to the images that the Templars in particular seem to leave behind, which is something that Rory followed with his Grail Trail in Montcern in France,
Yeah.
when he found the chapel with all of the two-dimensional symbols
Yeah.
of what can only be described as either sound, torus, energy fields, vortexes, or whatever. And they are in his wonderful video, the documentary that he did on that, there that you can see that there are sound waves being depicted in 2 dimensions. And that brings us then to what the Grail image is, because I think to most people they'll immediately think of a cup or a chalice, won't they?
Mm-hmm.
And through the ages, we've had the cauldron, which goes back to the Mabinogion, Bran and Bronwyn's cauldron that was supposed to heal the wounded soldiers and give
Yeah.
everlasting life. Then you have the sword, which of course immediately speaks to Arthur and pulling his sword out of the stone, which I've always seen as matter, the stone, and him pulling the spirit of himself out of the stone. So he was elevating his spirit above matter, just as an analogy, anyway.
That's interesting.
And then
And
you've got the...
again, I'm going to interrupt you,
Okay, you can. You're allowed.
if I
It's your
may,
show.
because when I was a young geologist student and I did my 6-week field mapping project to learn on the island of Egg in the Inner Hebrides, I
Nice.
didn't speak to anybody for 5 weeks. I didn't see anybody really. Um, I started to experience some very weird things, which are in my book, My Haunted Life, the first one. And a lot of people have read that. Well, one or two people left quite nasty reviews of the book saying, I must have a very fantastic mind, but these things really happened. And one was that one day I was on the beach. I'd been doing the cliff section and I was eating a sandwich that I'd made with a packet of crisps, as you do. And I started to hear this angelic singing. And I'm
Ooh,
thinking, because it was like carried on the wind, and I'm thinking, someone's out here with a radio, someone's sunbathing around the corner, they've got a radio on, and I'm just hearing it carried on the wind. So I
mm.
got up and had a good old look around. I didn't see anybody, but I did see something about 50 meters out, which was this arm come up with a sword.
Oh, wow.
My reaction was exactly that. I laughed, I giggled. I was giggling on the beach, This is ridiculous.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I started trying to get to it, and this angelic singing was getting louder and louder. But it was too far out, and it was cold, and it wasn't going to happen. It was too far away, and it was very dangerous. And eventually, it just went back down where it came from, and the angelic singing just stopped.
Good
And I've always
heavens.
wondered what the hell that meant.
Well, it's what it meant to you that's important. But I think you were being shown something pretty special.
Oh, yeah, boy, was I. And some of the other things that
Mm.
happened on that island were very peculiar. Anyway, sorry, back to the story because I'm also intrigued by the Templar connection and the fact that my good friend Sue, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and
No,
her,
rest in
her
peace,
magical
Sue.
partner Stuart, they found themselves on some very strange spiritual adventure following the birds, and they documented this in a series of excellent books, which unfortunately few people have actually read because they're fairly obscure. And they too came to this conclusion that the Templars basically were guarding these sacred paths, and that these sacred paths led to places that were of deep spiritual significance.
Mm.
And they too tried to make a connection, but
Mm.
didn't quite get as far as Rory has done.
Can I ask you what they were following with the birds?
They were following just the birds.
To
And the birds
follow
took them from church to sacred well to
how?
sacred stone to stone circle. And my I got on this journey because I had a very nasty breakup with my daughter's mother. And it devastated me because well, it just did. And I was at very low ebb, and Sue invited me. I'd read Sue's books, and obviously we knew each other through the Servants of the Light School of Esoteric Sciences and all that kind of stuff. And she invited me for a weekend with her and Stuart to sort of follow the footpath that they took in the first book, and that's what we did. And it was a very strange weekend because, as I've said on a couple of these, it's turned out to be all about me, which seemed a bit ridiculous at the time. Um, but even to the point of on the last evening, we were traveling too late and we stopped at some restaurant randomly and we took out the menus. We'd had a great day. And you are busy chattering and talking about all the synchronicities and everything that happened. Open the menu and it says Gary Pizza, Gary with chips, and Gary, and I'm like, what the hell?
Nice.
I mean, it turned out the chef was probably called Gary or something, but you
Well,
can
you might
see
think so, yes.
this sort of we all went deathly quiet and then burst out laughing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to go back sometime with my dowsing rods and douse that trip because I'm absolutely
Mm.
convinced they were following some kind of an alignment and
Mm.
the birds were taking them on
Yeah.
that trip.
I can fully relate to the reason I asked
Yeah,
is because I did a pilgrimage a couple of years ago when I went up to Scotland, which is where I'm from, and I went all over following the birds.
yeah.
I did exactly that.
Yeah,
It was either a hawk, a kestrel,
these were hawks.
a buzzard,
Yeah,
and at the end of my journey, and it wasn't the end, obviously, because it keeps on going and going,
yeah.
but at the end of that particular journey, it was a golden eagle, a pair of
Wow,
golden eagles,
nice.
and
Yeah,
they flew over me at Loch Rannoch. Within, they were only a couple of 100 feet up, and the pair were flying tip to tip, wingtip to tip. One was a juvenile and the other was an adult, but I don't know if it was a male or female. And they literally just skimmed the tops of the trees as I was sitting in quiet contemplation by the loch. And that was utter magic for me.
yeah, I can believe
But
it.
coming back, I went via Roslin. I'd never been to Roslin, even though I lived in Edinburgh for 14 years. And I didn't even know it was there. In those days, pre-internet, we didn't know this stuff, did we?
Right.
And so I finally got to Roslin after reading so much about it and hearing other people's stories. And I got there and I went out into the garden, the grave. It's not a graveyard, but there's a garden. And there is a beautiful yew tree in that garden. And I went and sat under that yew tree and meditated there. Because when I went into the church, the chapel itself, I wasn't feeling it. It's beautifully ornate. It's a glorious hymn to the natural world.
Mhm.
It's definitely got tons of clues and very odd anomalies like sweet corn when we hadn't even allegedly colonized the Americas and various other things. And I found it all rather overwhelming, but this yew tree and I had the most wonderful talk and this most wonderful feeling of the energy lines that clearly do come through Roslyn. And then I heard a bee, and I followed the bee with my eyes, and it went up to one of the turrets and disappeared. And I thought, oh, the legend of those turrets is true. Because many years ago, when they were first restoring the chapel, they went up onto the tops where they've got very strong spires that come out all the way along the top, if you look at pictures of Roslin. And each of these spires had a rose in the centre, so we're back to roses. And in the centre of the rose was a hole. And underneath, inside each of these spires, were beehives. Some of them really ancient.
Right.
And so they'd been put there deliberately by the builders as a home for the bees and possibly to encourage the sound of the bees and the humming. And that brings me to another thing that I heard. And I have a feeling this was in Romania, but I'd have to check. You can hire someone's beehives where they've built a little platform and a hut over the hives, and you go and sleep under the hive to absorb all of the wonderful energies of those
Hmm.
bees humming. And it's a bit of a thing, apparently,
Yeah.
that you can do that. So we've definitely got roses and bees and Templars, absolutely. They're
And
very
you
strongly
just
involved.
also triggered another synchronicity, which is in following the Templar line here, we called it the Templar line because it goes through some Templar sites.
Yeah, I
But
followed your
in,
work on it.
but in fact, we started to understand that there seems to be a connection with this aristocratic family in JH, which were called the
Mm,
Lords of Radets. The
right.
Lords of Radets symbol is
Mm,
a rose.
of course.
So when you go into the church in Yindakru Radets with the big node up in the ceiling,
Yeah.
their rose symbol.
The rose window here
Yeah,
at the Minster.
yeah,
Roses are everywhere. The rose of Lancashire and Yorkshire,
yeah,
the rose, the English rose, as all of it.
yeah,
It's very, very resonant down the ages, these symbols, but so's the bee.
yeah.
So is the
It's the
bee.
symbol of the servants of the light
Yeah.
esoteric school as well, by the way.
Yes. And and in Egyptian times, the bee was considered to be the keeper of the doorways.
Mhm.
And we're back to keys.
Yeah,
So that's been a lovely little journey of synchronicity round the houses. But the bee thing that I wanted to also tell you about with regard to the Rudston was that on several occasions now I've hummed with my face up against the stone. And what that's done is it's awoken up the worms in the grass around the Rudston. They come up to see what the sound is, because clearly my humming with my mouth literally right up against it, and I just hum different tones and different musical notes, and I've done it with others as well. When we've gathered together, we've hummed to it, and it starts in your thighs, and I know not why it's in your thighs, but it seems to start in your thighs. You get a sound like it's almost like a pneumatic drill going zzz. It's so strong, and it moves up, and by the time it hits your crown up here, it's sort of like a bell ringing. And so the sound aspect of things, which I'm sure you've just told us the story of the area where the type 4 lines didn't cross, creating a screeching sound. And I do know the geopathic stresses of that can be, terrible if you happen to live on one. Shall we just quickly do a potted history of some of the tales and how they've come down to us, the narrative?
I'm only about a third of the way through the book, but one of the things that I also liked was the fact that Rory brings in the concept of a stone as well. And to me, that brings even bigger linkages, which really resonated with my magical background, right?
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about there is Nicholas Flamel.
Yeah, and the alchemists.
And the alchemist and the philosopher's stone,
Yeah.
The elixir of eternal youth, immortality,
Which, of
etc.
course, I've been drinking on the side.
Well, yeah, I mean, green, strange potions. It's very Harry Pottery, isn't it?
See my background?
But it is. I mean, he went to Spain, did Flamel. He went to Toledo, and there were allegedly great scriptoriums, libraries filled with texts, and alchemical information. But I think if I'm right, he met a chap called Albrehemelin, the mage, who showed him alchemical drawings, which I think Rory covers in this book, where he talks about them. I can't. But
So
Flamel
Rory
was
gets into
definitely.
some detail about all of the medieval stories and earlier, right? And what I kind of enjoy is this idea that it play is like a central theme with various groups picking up on it to try to push a particular aspect of a narrative.
Absolutely.
And I think that's absolutely accurate. You know, that's exactly how it would work.
But
So
the
perhaps
problem
you go
is
into
that
that a bit more.
we have so many versions, and we have
Yeah,
so many storytellers, and all of them will have their own cultural
yeah,
place in time, but they will also have their own agendas,
yeah.
because and you've kind of got to look at where they're almost shooting an arrow and trying to hit two targets. And I've always had that feeling with Wolfram von Eschenbach, because he's writing a more Christian tale at a much later date, but he's also, I think, writing for the Cathars. He's the one that first introduces the idea that the Grail is brought by a dove carrying a wafer.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, that's very Cathar, because their symbol is the dove. And before that, you have, gosh, I've written some notes. Allow me to just quickly look at my notes. And before that, we've got Robert de Boron, the French poet, who references first a vessel. And I like that, because a vessel, it's a ship, it's a cup, it's us. We are vessels, are we not?
Yeah.
Vessels of our spirit being held within the matter of the flesh. And then von Eschenbach was also very clearly defined by knightliness. He was exploring what it meant to be a medieval knight. He was writing in the 1200s, so he was exploring knightliness as well. And then you've got the kind of the Catholic overlay as well, don't you? Because, you know, the wafer aspect
Yeah.
is the transubstantiation.
Yeah.
It's the Roman Catholic aspect too. So there's all of those woven in. And for us as Grail seekers, we have to kind of pull our thread, find the right threads that lead us, not on a merry dance at somebody else's agenda or narrative, but to find our own. And one of the Grail people that I have read widely and researched quite a lot is the German Otto Rahn. And have you got to that part in the book yet?
Yeah, I'm past it.
You've gone past that. Have you read any of Rahn's writings?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, well, you need to, Gary, because he's very into bees and roses.
Okay.
He's very, yeah. Rahn was for anyone who doesn't know, Rahn was a very, very troubled soul in many respects. He was alive during the period of time that we all know as the Second World War, and he started on his journey seeking the Grail, as we all do. And unfortunately, he got sucked into the debacle that was the rise of the Third Reich. And because of his information, he wrote a very small book on the Grail,
Yeah.
having been to France in, I think, 31 or 33. And he went to the Cathar stronghold in the Languedoc of France, southern France. And he specifically explored Rennes-le-Château, and that brings in the Holy Blood and Holy Grail, which we haven't mentioned, by Lincoln, Bagent and Lee, which I think we should just pay some lip service to, because for them, the Grail was in fact the bloodline of Christ.
Yeah.
And when I first read that back in the 80s, I learned so much from them. I'm very grateful to the three authors for that, because they led me to the Cathars, who I would never have heard of back in the 80s, pre-internet.
Yeah.
And that led to the journey of what the Cathars were, what Gnosticism was, what the Gnostic Gospels were, and really diving deep into what is Christianity, how has it been, again, promulgated as a narrative as much as a religion. And looking, I think, for me, at these people who I really resonated with, the Cathars. And I think Rahn did too, very strongly. In fact, I think he probably was remembering his Cathar nature from another time. And he was very, he would quote the whole of that story that I read at the beginning of Laurelin's Rose Garden, because for him, the buzzing sound of the bees was another of those clues that he was on the Grail Trail. Unfortunately for Rahn, he got caught up in particularly Himmler's search with the Ahnenerbe,
Yeah.
the strange group of SS Nazis who were seeking the Spear of Destiny, because that's what Hitler wanted, apparently. And I do hope I haven't scuppered your channel by mentioning the H word there. Probably not, since we're not talking about
I
it
don't
in
think
a
so, no.
political way. But he unfortunately, he came to a rather sad end halfway up a mountain, did Rahn. He had allegedly Jewish ancestry, which he tried to keep hidden. And there was a sniff that he might have been homosexual. That was also in there, very no to the N-word people. And so he was sort of sidelined and drummed out in a sense, and he froze to death on a mountainside, surrendering, I think, to the mountain. But he saw that Mont Salvash, which was the sacred mountain in Wolfram von Eschenbach's stories of the Grail, he thought Mont Segur, the famous Cathar mountain,
Right.
instead of surrendering to the Albigensian crusaders, the Cathars held out for nearly 2 years on this mountaintop. And then instead of surrendering, they willingly and happily and singingly went to their death in flames on the the fields of Crémat, or the fields of cremation in France. And it's a sad end to a beautiful troubadour, Gnostic possibly. It's hard to know because they wrote very little down. And it's hard to know what their Grail journey was. Do you have any thoughts on them?
Well, I was going to say, funny how things work out because I too read that book about, Sion Priory and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and also made me interested in those guys. But when I was living in Houston and doing the Servants of the Light first course, which took me 6 years, I got interested in hypnotherapy and past life regression.
Mm.
And amongst the few well-rounded out characters that I discovered somehow linked to me was one who horrified me, actually quite a famous name, but not actually the most famous one, but his son, who had exactly the same name, and I'm not going to say it, but he is associated with the famous words, "Oh, kill them all, God will recognize his own."
Oh, I know. Yes.
And apparently I could have been his name.
Yes.
And
That was when that was when they took I
yeah,
think was it Carcassonne?
yes.
And they
So
killed a lot because God will know his own.
here's the weird thing. When I was about 14 or 15, my mum and dad and my brothers, we had a caravan. We went off to the south of France. We went to that side. And I spent the whole time telling them, I've lived here before. I've lived here
Yeah.
before. I know this place. I know this place.
Yeah.
And I did. I could turn corners and see that. And I mean, it was bizarre. They thought I was stupid.
Mm.
So yet again, there seems for me there's a linkage there, and it's funny how all the I mean, people listening to this say, "Ah, Gary, you're off your head." You've got a fine imagination, young man. But I'm not so young, am I? But when you live through this stuff and it all comes together, it all comes together in quite powerful ways.
There's a weave, Gary.
Yeah,
There's an actual weave to
exactly.
it.
So I'm
And
I'm absolutely with you, and this is why when I was reading the book, I'm like, oh my goodness me, and I was like. I was thinking, how the hell did Rory put all this together? I mean, I could have put all this together, but it never entered my head. How
mm,
did he do this?
it's a
What an
wonder.
amazing feat.
It's a wonder, and he's a wonder.
Yeah,
And it is on his great shoulders that we stand.
yeah, unbelievable.
And hopefully travel a little way with him, finding out more, because we are now, as we know, in all year round harmony time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I told him I told him just recently, I'm going to make my own little documentary video in the summer when the weather's better
Good.
and try to revisit his story and stretch it a little bit further with some of the stuff I've been working on here with Eva and sort of.
Have you noticed much of a difference now that we are in all round harmony? How are you finding dowsing in this new environment?
I find dowsing extremely easy. In fact, I went yesterday and I went on my own. And because it was particularly chilly, even though I really wanted to get out and do some real hiking, I decided to stay in my chimney and douse the
Yeah.
old-fashioned way with one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the rod, stopping when I needed to stop. And I realized to my utter amazement that I now do not actually need the rod. I could feel the line coming before I ever got there.
Yeah. That's how I've always been, Gary.
And I'm like that now. I mean, Eva, she doesn't need the rod, she feels it.
Yeah,
But
I do too. Yeah.
I'm driving along and I'm like, well, it should have been here. And according, I've got my maps and I'm saying it should cross the line somewhere there. And of course, it never does because it's never straight. And you're
No.
thinking, okay, well, maybe I've gone too. Oh no, hang on, I feel that it's coming, it's coming. Yeah, there we go.
There we are, and there it is. It's
Yeah,
lovely, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
I think from what Hamish Miller used to say about housing, it's really just you and your intuition talking to each other.
yeah. Well, it means that you have to know that these lines are there subconsciously. There's
Yes,
no
we
other
do.
explanation. I mean, subconsciously, I already have to know that this line is there.
Yeah.
And then if you think about that and you extrapolate it backwards through history and you think about where churches are cited and all this stuff, it's like, okay, so we've lost knowledge then somehow. Because we
Maybe
must
that
have known a
senses
lot
that.
more in the past than we do now about some of this stuff.
Well, maybe our senses were more acute in the
Yeah,
past and we had
yeah,
less distraction, less environmental pollution, less toxins within and without. It's a
yeah.
lot of things that have led to us to this moment. But in the past, those instincts, those feelings were not dismissed by, by science.
Yeah.
They were not just sort of, they were listened to. And I think the more you work the inner muscles of the intuition, the more likely you are to not need props of any kind. You will just do it.
Mm,
I was once at a stone circle up in Scotland, and it's a very beautiful small circle, but it's got an outer circle. So it's one of those rare ones that has two stone circles. And I went and sat down because I suddenly came over very tired. And I was sort of thinking, gosh, what's wrong with me? It's a beautiful day. I'm in a stone circle. I should be feeling great. And I just felt knackered. I went and sat cross-legged on just off a stone that had collapsed and sat on the ground. And I started to feel this tingling coming up me, and my hair was moving, and oh, this is nice. Don't know what I sat on, but it's very pleasant. And I went and got my dowsing rods from the car, and that was the node where the two main energy lines went over,
mm.
and and I found not just I was precisely sitting on it. So after that, I sort of thought, well, maybe I don't need these rods, but I'm not so arrogant as to think I don't, because sometimes
No, I
it's
use
good
it.
to just get that
Yeah,
extra feedback,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit of extra. Recently, I even picked up a little branch of alder from a tree that had a lovely fork in it. And I just played with it because I hadn't used a stick for a long time. And it was bobbing away and going, hello, Lily, aren't you nice? And I'm going, hello, a little tree, aren't you lovely? And it was literally picking up the flow of the Gypsy Race River, which is where I was at the time. And it was picking up where it goes under the ground and
Nice.
showing me its
Yeah.
pathway through. Now, I know mentally that the Gypsy Race goes straight through the wolds on a west-east trajectory to Bridlington, where it goes out to sea. It does a funny little dogleg bend at the Rudston, interestingly. But even though I know that information, of course it meanders a little bit. It's not straight,
Mm,
like on the
mm.
maps when they draw it. It's not like that. So there's a lovely undulation to it. And a little place that I used to go and sit at just to have a sandwich or a break was exactly where the Race River bent. And I was sitting above it.
Yeah, you sound a lot like Eva. She's intuitive, and I mean the number of times she describes it well in the book she just put together. I helped her with it, and it made me laugh because she describes one instance where she's like dismissive. Gary went off with his sticks and his rods and his scientific inquiry,
Yeah.
and I sat down on the spot that felt nice, and sure enough, 2 or 3 minutes later, Gary arrived above me with his sticks.
You have to look, though, at the fact that what you're probably doing now is marrying up your masculinity and your femininity.
Mm,
You're intuitive with your logical, and
yeah.
that you've found a bridge between them where actually the tools aren't needed, perhaps, where
Mm,
you can literally trust that intuition. And I think you're a very good demonstration of that, in the sense that you've come on this very long journey mapping the Templar lines. And as you've done so, it's shifted where you are internally.
mm.
It's changed you
Oh yeah, absolutely,
fundamentally.
and the same with Eva. I mean, it's same with her. And
Well, that's the Grail Trail.
the interesting thing is that in the case of us, it's also linked in with the Slavic mythologies.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that the sky god is Perun with his lightning bolt.
Mm,
The mother goddess is Merkosh, and the underworld horn god is Veles.
mm.
And the story goes that Perun sits at the top of the tree, and Veles is in the tree roots, and he's a shapeshifter and a trickster, and can be seen as a dragon, a serpent. And he
Tree of
comes up,
life.
he comes up and steals Perrin's cattle, wife, kids, whatever it is. His wife is going to be Murkosh if he's got one, and drags them down under the tree into the underworld. And then Perrin gets angry and shoots his weapon at Veles, eventually defeating him, restores his wife, and that it's the annual cycle, of course. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we called the currents, Murkosh and Perrin.
Yeah.
So the Templar is made of Murkosh and Perrin.
Nice.
And over time, we began to realize I'm very Perrin-like. I have a very strong, quick temper, and but I'm very, magnanimous and big and all that, very
Yeah.
Perrin-like. And she's very Murkosh-like, and she's got one or two Veleses in her life, and as we went along this trip, she bought me a new geological hammer, which is, it's a natural thing to do, perhaps, if you know that the guy is a geologist and he talks
Yeah.
about, I don't
It
have a
is.
geological hammer anymore. But actually, she was giving me my weapon.
Ah, Thor style.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
in the book, she's talking about this journey of doing the Templar thing, but also
Yeah.
how she realized that she's very much like Murkosh, and she realized that Murkosh doesn't belong to Perrin and doesn't belong to Veles. Murkosh is an independent, entity that has choice and who balances the whole thing out, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, there's another story. Back to
No, but the symbolism of that is it put me in mind of a picture that I've seen that Carl Jung drew in his Red Book of the serpent engaged in the roots of the tree of life, reaching out. It's
this
a
would be
very
Veles.
powerful symbology within
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
again, there's a marriage of the divine feminine with the sacred masculine
yeah.
coming through
There's
within
another
that.
piece of symbology in Slavic myth as well, which is rather bizarre, is that Perun is sometimes depicted on a horse spearing the serpent, which is Veles. So it looks like St.
Yes,
George and St. Michael and the dragon,
absolutely.
which then you start thinking, aha, dowsing.
Yes, get your odds out. Yes. There's some pictures in the book, actually, the Rory book, I think, of the alchemy that have to do with spears and spearing things.
Yes, yeah,
Again, it's the putting the spirit into matter, maybe alchemically,
yeah,
which is where I was when I was talking about the Arthur drawing the sword from the stone
yes,
imagery. So these images they're very old.
yeah,
This is the thing, they're not as old as you and I, but they're
no,
very, very old.
yeah.
They're definitely starting within the roots of our own DNA to weave into the fabric that we're bringing into this present moment and where we are at
That's,
this hugely exciting time of
that's why I call
awakening.
the lines the web of weird.
The Web of Weird. Oh,
Yeah.
great book. Great book. Yes, I read that years ago, but it was a good one.
But I think that that's what was being talked about was the lines in the
Yeah.
book. Anyway, so the other thing that strikes me is that in these stories that start this, start off, Rory starts talking about, you've got the king and you've got the land, and the
Mm,
relationship between the king and the land is like the above and below, which is an occult principle, as
mhm.
above, like below.
Yeah.
So, when life gets tough and things are going wrong, don't look out into the land and blame the weather. Look in yourself and see what you're doing to create that, because you,
Well,
you and the land are one. You and your reality are one thing, right?
mm, it,
That's
yeah,
one way of looking at it.
yeah, it's a big one that because in the whole of the story, the Grail cycle stories, you have a Fisher King,
Yeah.
you have and he's often wounded
And that's the
or,
other thing that
or
fascinates me. And
sick.
this is what got me buying the book, because I said to Rory, well, Rory's and I have talked a little bit about nerds and grills and things like that. And then one day I just sent him a text message and said, what about this? What about this wound, this Fisher King wound? And he said,
Mm.
ah. So then I
Um,
thought, I better buy the book.
well, you see, I have my Kingfisher here.
I see him.
Is
Oh,
it? Yeah.
uh,
I mean, obviously you've got the Monty Python Holy Grail business as well, which is, just a lovely reworking
yeah.
of comedic joy, really. The wounding of the Fisher King is I think significant because it's suggestive of all of humanity's wounds, and the king is simply the symbol of it, the personification of that. And his bound upness, his incredible, inextricable connection with the land clearly has an affect on the land. And the Grail Knight, who variously is Percival, Parsival, there's so many names, Peridor as well. Those names are really interesting, though, if you look at the etymology.
Yeah.
I wrote it down somewhere, and I'm just looking to see if I can find it. Per means through, obviously, and the Parsival bit. Where did I write it? Could you tell me, please, Gary? I've written it down somewhere, but I can't find it. Got it. Yeah, Percival. Cheval is horse.
Right.
In French, it's knight, but it's also a cavalier, caval,
Yeah.
Percival, and so on. So you have the knight through his vehicle, which in this case is the knightliness of being a mounted rider, who then journeys through these lands. And this Parsival is the one that then has to answer the questions. And that brings us back to the gatekeepers that we were talking about earlier. We are going in total spirals today. It's really quite lovely. Let me read you what the gatekeepers' questions are and see if you can answer them. Hey, why don't you try and answer them?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Gatekeepers' questions. Go on, have a go. What do you seek?
The Grail.
Correct. One.
It's like Monty Python.
What is the Grail?
Well, I think the Grail is, I think increasingly, I think the Grail is an energy, a noded set of energy lines, actually.
Okay. That one gets a
Well, that's
because
what I think.
unfortunately it has different forms. So I'm
Yeah,
going to
it
be
has
a bit
different
more
forms,
generous
but
and give you half a point.
it has different forms,
Yeah.
and that's because there are many different types of lines, there are many different types of nodes, and if you visit certain nodes, each of them gives you a distinctly different
Yeah.
feeling. So the pagan node, I call the pagan node because quite frankly, whenever I go there, the energy is raw and if I may say so, almost sexual. It's like very ethereal, I guess,
Earthy.
earthy. Yeah. And then if you go to the one in Indicru Fradets, it's plainly very, very sort of churchy, spiritual,
Yeah.
higher Christian almost. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Angel singing. Yeah, I've got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
all vary. I mean, if you go to nodes on smaller lines, and churches are often placed on those little churches, that
Yeah,
they're
we
really
know why.
angelic as well. You know, very pleasant and angelic. Um, the really powerful ones can sometimes be almost scary because there's something to the energy that's uncontrolled,
Yes.
or evokes an uncontrolled feeling within you, I guess.
That I think it's more the latter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Because it's a natural response when
yeah,
we hit something we don't understand.
yeah,
Particularly if it's a strong energy and it's
yeah,
chaotic, then we can't control it because that's
yeah.
us overstepping our humanity, really.
And then I
Let me
think
continue
the
asking
point
you.
I think the point you made earlier, I just want to for anybody listening, the different shapes though really do gel with the idea of the torus or the form,
Yes.
and that's where the Rory spent some time. It's particular. I'll post the video link in the bottom.
Would you? I was going to
Yeah,
ask you if you would,
because I
because
think he does
he
a
takes the
demonstration.
cylinder.
Yeah,
He takes the cylinder and shows the
yeah,
actual
yeah,
reach of the energy field,
exactly.
and then shows you that you're looking down the cylinder, so you'll see it as a two-dimensional circle.
Yeah,
He then shows the torus coming up like a trumpet and then going down the sides. But initially it looks like a cup. So again, another beautiful
yeah,
resonance with the others. So it comes up, it does its double torus shape. And then if you're looking down on that, well, how will that look? Well, it'll look like a vesica piscis,
yeah,
you know, the
yeah.
with the center. And yeah, so all of those are perspectives. And we're looking at 2D images and then seeing them as three-dimensional aspects. And I think in Rory's video, where he talks about the Grail Found, he shows that very clearly through the graphics.
Yeah.
From my memory, is that the one you were thinking
Yes.
of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Pop a link for people to see below, because it really is. We can't say it any better than Rory has, and it really is very clever, that bit.
Yeah.
So on with your questions, sir. You
Oh,
need
gee.
Sir Knight. I'd like you to now say, how do you seek the unknown?
Oh boy. How do I seek the unknown? It's funny because I do that all the time, but I'm not sure how I do it.
Keep it simple.
I just follow what's in front of me. Yes, I follow the synchronicities.
Correct answer. You just follow the path.
Mm.
That's it.
Yeah.
You just keep following the path. Where does the path begin?
Guys, it's like an exam.
It is, isn't it? But you're on
Where,
it. You're a Grail seeker, so you have to
where
answer.
does the path begin? It begins with curiosity, I think, to
Yeah,
be honest.
good.
Curiosity in the sense of who am I, what's it all about? And
Mm.
so it comes from curiosity. And then as you start to explore, you don't really find the answers, you just find more questions.
Yeah, yeah. And more questions and more questions. And that's the quest eye on.
Yeah,
Even the word tells us it's the
yeah,
quest eye is on,
yeah,
basically.
exactly.
It's actually at a gate. The answer to that is it's at this gate. So
Mhm.
it's where we are now. So you could say that's a temporal rooting in time,
Yeah,
but it's based, I agree with you. I think curiosity is the key to anything, actually, and keeping the mind as open as you
yeah.
can, not presupposing or prejudging anything, which I think is something that most dowsers have naturally inbuilt. All the ones I've ever met have been curious, open-minded souls, which is, you know, the first path on the step on the path, really.
Well, when you realize you can ask the rods questions,
Yeah, it's a bit of a mind blow, isn't it?
that's the big moment. Yeah.
So where does the path end? I'm going to give you a clue because I'm very kind.
Okay.
Okay. Think of the Ouroboros.
At the beginning.
Yes, at the same place, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was too easy. I gave you
All the
too big
world
a
is a
clue.
circle. Yeah.
I'm going to get nasty now. I'm not giving you any more clues. How do you know you are on the path?
Well, I'm answering in regard to my experience, and that would be that the synchronicities keep on coming.
Yeah.
Once once you lose the synchronicities, that's when it's, oh, what have I done? Where did I go wrong? Got to
Mm.
back up a couple of steps,
Yeah.
and the synchronicities have to keep coming. And we did a something for the Irish Diviners Association last week, Eva and I, a presentation, and we talked a lot about how the path you're led a lot of the time, if you will,
Yeah.
but allow yourself to be led.
Yeah, you have to let go.
Yeah, so we talked about finding a really beautiful place, which was the second node that I attempted with Eva's help to repair and was successful with permission. And we were in this place. We were all hyped up about being in Vasetine, and it was in the in the Czech Republic. We thought it was going to be beautiful. We thought we were going to find this magnificent node on the Templar line. We show up, and it's a horrendous communist place in the middle of these beautiful mountains.
Wow.
And there's no real history, although the land was owned by the Templars in the past. And I said to my rod, is the Templar line here? Yes. Show me which way. How far? Like 2 kilometers or something. So I'm doing that, and at the very same moment, Eva comes up and said, "I think we should go for a walk this way." Okay, that matches. And it was a hot day, and we didn't have anything because we'd left everything in the van. And I'm like, we're walking through this horrendous graveyard that went on forever. I'm like, Eva, I don't really like being in the graveyard. It makes me feel uncomfortable, and we've no water and it's hot. Why don't we just go back to the van? No, 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 no. must keep walking. And we walk through this communist housing estate, and finally we arrive in this sort of street in a valley. And she says, "We need to be up there." And Rod said yes. And we couldn't get up there because the footpath was closed, so we had to find another way around, but we persisted. And when we finally arrived, it wasn't like a fanfare or some amazing thing. It was just, oh my goodness, feel the energy
Mm.
here.
Mm.
And that we were led there, and we allowed ourselves to be led there, and this happens all the time. And
But what guided you?
well, I think that's a difficult question because I think there's two sides to that. One is there's a higher power. I mean, I call it. I use the same language as somebody else that does dowsing that I talk to regularly. The management,
Mm.
because I like that term, the
I
management.
think Hamish used to call them the
Yeah,
manager.
he studied under Hamish, so that's probably where he got it from. And
Okay.
then I also think that it comes from deep inside of yourself because I think you already know the stuff, it's already there.
Yeah.
So in a sense, me and the management are one. And
Well,
when we are acting as one, then good things happen.
what if we change the management to the Grail? And then the Grail is the one that's guiding you.
Well, the management can be the grill, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, that's the correct answer according to this.
Yeah.
How shall you accomplish the task?
How many
That's
questions are
that's
there?
yeah, that's the quest.
Yeah. And it becomes an obsession, actually.
All who go forth on the quest achieve their heart's desire,
Yeah.
is the answer.
Yeah.
What do you take with you? And don't say your dowsing rods.
What do I take with me?
You need 3 qualities internally.
Oh, okay.
If you're on a grail, bearing in mind this is a grail quest, you're not
Yeah.
necessarily just dowsing.
Okay, so it probably is something like oh, I don't know. You tell me.
The most important thing I think that anyone ever needs if they want to follow a spiritual path is courage.
Yeah, and increasingly so these days.
Yeah, especially
Yeah,
in
okay,
these days.
I'll take courage, yeah, absolutely.
Love and dedication.
Dedication and
And
love,
you
yeah.
you have dedication in spades, Gary, because of
Yeah.
the way that you are. And the love aspect comes back to what we were talking about as love and the spirit and love being so very strongly intertwined,
Mm,
which is what I read in the with the King Laurenin's Rose Garden, where that was the key, the Dietrich
yeah.
was the spirit of love within the heart. How will you bring back what you find on your quest?
Well, for me, I guess I bring it back in me because it changes me.
Precisely, in your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where is the Grail hidden?
In plain sight.
Probably exactly. Where else would it be? It's in every single one of us, would be my answer.
Yeah.
It's in every single one of us. In
Yeah.
terms of the Grail stories, it was in a labyrinth in a castle. And that had to be accessed by the knight, Percival, Peridor, whoever.
But the labyrinth in a castle is a good description for life.
Yeah, well, that beautiful labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral in France. That image that you can conjure in your mind when we go round and we go back and then we go round and we go back, and that is such a mirror for the
It's
human
like
condition.
a while ago, Eva said to me I'd give her a few of my books that I'd written, and one of them I wrote 2005, and it was at the completion of my Servants of the Light course. It's called Inner Journeys, Explorations of the Soul, and I gave her that.
Good
One,
title.
yeah, thank you. And one day she said to me, she says, "I don't get it." She said, when did you write that? I said 2005, somewhere around there. She said, but you seemed like you were almost on the verge of some major thing, and yet you still seem to be just on the verge of some major
Mm,
thing.
mm,
And I says, well, that's because life has this horrendous habit of grabbing you and dragging you back in.
yeah.
And so just as you're about to have that intense breakthrough moment, your relationship falls apart, or you lose your job, or
Mm,
World War III happens, and you
yeah.
get dragged back, sucked back into this reality.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating. But I think one of the other things on the quest is persistence. I think, yeah, you know, you said it,
Dedication.
dedication and
Dedication,
persistence.
discipline,
Because
persistence. They're
yeah,
all
discipline,
horrid words.
you just
But then,
keep being pushed off it. And I think in the
yeah.
modern world, it's getting harder and harder because, I mean, go out and look at people in the pub. They don't even talk to each other. They're all deep in their telephones.
Mm.
They sleep.
I often wonder what the knights on the Grail quest, when they were trotting on their horses between the castles and following the ley lines, what kind of people they met, and whether those people would have understood their journey. And to a certain extent, I think perhaps they would have,
I think they would have done.
because they would have been more aware of the folk stories of the mystical aspects of nature. And in those
Exactly.
times,
Exactly.
pre-Christianity, they quite probably had a deeply pagan sense of religion. And the quest itself remains to those who feel called. And
Yeah.
I'd like to think that the people who are watching this now are similarly called to a quest, called to do good in this life, to serve others, and to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be.
Yeah.
Whatever, wherever we are, we bloom where we're planted.
Yeah.
Whatever we're doing, we give of ourselves, our love, and our service. And
Yeah.
that in itself is knightly, and that in itself is part of the quest.
Indeed.
So next time, because I think there ought to be a next time,
Yeah,
because
there
we've
should
only
be.
literally scratched the
Well,
very, very
we've
surface.
we've told everybody something about the nature of nodes and the relationship, but we haven't made that connection properly. So definitely that
Well,
needs to
for
be more
anyone who
explored.
is interested, get some of Gary's books, and also this one is a really, really good read. If you're interested in the Grail and you haven't come across it, Rory Duff, Grail Found.
What I need to ask you then is, how do you know all of this? Because you've been working with Rory for some time, right?
Yes, I have. I've had the great privilege, no, honour, to be a friend of Rory's and to study with him, doing his Sacred Path modules. I began them, I think, in 2020. I've lost track of time. It's just such an elastic piece of thread, anyway.
Mm.
Um, and I was part of the first group of doing the Sacred Path modules with Rory, where we covered a huge variety of subjects and had weekly meetings where we'd discuss either previously sent out bits of um, important information, and then we'd look at pictures or we'd look at alchemical texts or Carl Jung. And there are different modules all the way along the line. And I can honestly tell you that it was one of the most, it has been, because I'm still on it, one of the most revealing journeys of my life. In as much as I have been able to slot in to my psyche bits of information that I've had randomly plopping about in my brain for
Yeah,
centuries, it feels like. And some of these random bits of information are the dots that Rory's connected in his amazing work. And I will be forever grateful. Rory, thank you. Hope you're feeling okay today. Walk for more than 20 minutes, okay?
right.
And for me, the Sacred Path modules have been enlightening, opening, transforming. I've learned a lot about myself, about how I interact with others. And the other important aspect to it is meditation in groups. We have a small core group of people who've been doing these Sacred Path modules in different cohorts, I suppose would be the right word. And we all come together and meditate. And the synchronicities of inexplicable connections between our visualizations and meditations has been increasing and increasing and increasing to the point now we're almost thinking we don't need to speak anymore. Because we've got to a point of synchronicity where I can say ripples on the water and someone will go pebbles in the stream. We've got it absolutely pulling together. And if Rudolf Steiner and Rory and other commentators and other people who have prophesied this are correct, this rising group consciousness is an absolute delight, because yes, you do retain you. This isn't some hive mind stuff. This isn't robotic. This isn't being linked to anything. It is simply holding the individuality that's Lily and Gary and whoever else, and coming together in communion, in union with each other. And having worked for some time with these people, these beloved friends, you develop this instant cognitive connection that's beyond cognitive, actually. And so part of Rory's work now, I think, now that he's getting better, thank heavens, is that he would like to see more and more people coming together on a regular basis at the nodes that are local to them. There's no need to go far or travel or any of that. And holding group consciousness space together with others all over the world. And of course, we've been doing it for, well, several, possibly even a decade now, by going to the nodes and meditating at the harmony times, the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices. And now that we have all year round harmony, we're looking into and hoping to discover a timing schedule that works in harmony with the cosmos, the stars, the constellations, the moon and the sun, and of course beloved Gaia, the Mother Earth herself, in terms of when we should be doing this more regularly together. And so that's the next stage of what we're inquiring into. And again, it's an unfolding journey of synchronicities on the trail and following the Grail wherever it's guiding.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to be with you.